Sarah's trembling fingers gripped the armrest, her knuckles pale against the polished leather. The jet jolted again, rattling the champagne flutes in their holders. Outside the oval windows, the Rockies stretched endlessly beneath them, coated in ice and isolation. Across the aisle, Grant adjusted his cufflinks, laughing softly with Delilah, who wore a co-pilot uniform she had no right to wear. Sarah tried to meet his eyes, but he didn't look her way. Her seatbelt pressed hard against her swollen belly. She was 7 months along, and every bump in the sky made her flinch. Delilah glanced over her shoulder, lips curled in something between a smirk and a snarl. "Ladies and gentlemen," Delilah announced, standing with a smugness that didn't fit the role of crew. "We've had enough turbulence for one flight. Time to disembark." Sarah frowned. What is she talking about? Delilah unlatched the side panel and stepped toward the emergency door. The warning lights flashed red. The pressurized cabin hissed as the door handle moved. "Wait, what are you doing?" Sarah's voice cracked as she leaned forward, panic rising fast. Grant remained seated, his gaze fixed on a folder in his lap. Delilah looked back with mock pity. "You've had a good run, sweetheart, but the altitude's no place for dead weight. You can't be serious." Sarah's breath quickened as the cold wind burst through the opening, whipping her hair around her face. "I'm carrying your child." Grant finally looked up. His eyes were flat, hollow. "That's the problem." The words hit her like the gust of air that followed. Her fingers scrambled to unlock her seatbelt, but Delilah was faster. She yanked it open, grabbed Sarah by the shoulders, and dragged her to the open hatch. "No!" Sarah screamed, clutching her belly, her boots sliding across the plush floor as Delilah shoved her forward. Delilah leaned close, whispering over the roar of the wind. "Tell the clouds we said hello." Then, with one final shove, she was gone. "Ta to you." Wind swallowed her scream as she tumbled through the sky, spinning, flailing, her vision blurred by tears and wind. Her hands clutched instinctively at the pack strapped to her back. The parachute. It hadn't been there when she boarded. Someone must have buckled it onto her while she was unconscious earlier. She yanked the cord with everything. She had. For a second, nothing. Then a violent jerk snapped her body upward as the chute deployed with a thunderous flap. She dangled in the freezing wind, gasping, barely conscious. Her face was bloodied from the fall, one boot missing, her belly, cramping in spasms of fear. Below her, a vast stretch of snowy forest awaited, its peaks jagged, branches cloaked in white. She hit the trees with a bone-cracking thud, branches snapping around her as she fell through them like a rag doll. Her body finally crashed into the snow with a dull crunch. She groaned, curling instinctively around her stomach, whispering prayers. She couldn't finish. The world spun. Every breath was like inhaling glass. Her coat was torn, her leg twisted awkwardly beneath her. A trail of blood followed where her face had scraped a branch. She lay there, stunned, for what felt like hours. Snow began to cover her. Around her the forest groaned and creaked in the cold. Distant howls pierced the silence, low and haunting. Wolves. Closer than she wanted to imagine. Gritting her teeth, she began to crawl. Her limbs screamed in protest, her breath shallow and sharp. She dragged herself toward a cluster of fallen logs, leaving streaks of red across the snow. Every movement jolted her ribs and stomach, but she kept going, refusing to stop. Her baby wasn't crying. That was good. Maybe she was safe inside her still. The air reeked of pine and blood. Behind her, footprints formed, some hers, others not. She couldn't tell if they were human or not, but she had no time to analyze. A sudden snarl echoed through the trees. Sarah froze. Then she moved faster, clawing at roots, dragging herself into the hollow beneath one of the logs. Her body barely fit. Snow fell over the entrance, cloaking her from sight. Her hand trembled as she pressed it to her stomach. She winced at the bruising, at the burning in her side. But the faintest kick met her palm. Alive. The baby was still alive. Her breath came in clouds, shaky and slow. She stared through a small gap in the wood, the moonlight casting shadows across the forest floor. A pair of eyes glowed in the dark, watching, waiting. Then, after a long pause, they vanished back into the trees. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. Her body was broken, her mind shattered, but inside her something else stirred, a refusal to die. They had tried to erase her. Now she had only one choice left: survive long enough to return. And when she did, they would learn what it felt like to fall. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional, suspense-filled stories like this one. Cameras flashed in rapid succession as Grant stepped up to the podium, flanked by Delilah in a black silk dress that hugged her fake baby bump perfectly. The Collins Aviation logo stood tall behind them, a massive screen looping serene footage of private jets soaring through blue skies. Grant's expression was sober, rehearsed. 3 days ago, he began, pausing for dramatic effect, we lost a beloved member of our family during a tragic flight training exercise. He cleared his throat as Delilah dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, milking the sympathy of the press. Sarah Collins was more than my wife. She was our future. This loss has shaken us all. Delilah sniffled and placed a hand on her stomach, the camera zooming in on her gesture as if it were a symbol of new hope. But life moves forward, Grant continued, and in times of darkness, we must hold on to the light that remains. The crowd clapped politely. Someone shouted a question about the nature of the accident. Grant replied with carefully chosen vagueness. Unfortunate turbulence during a mid-air training simulation. We're cooperating fully with investigators. He bowed his head, the picture of a grieving husband. Delilah lowered her gaze, masking the glint of triumph in her eyes. Dozens of miles away, a small, dust-covered TV flickered in a ranger's cabin, the volume barely audible over the wind howling. Outside, Sarah sat wrapped in torn blankets, a jagged scar across her cheek and her leg elevated on a stool. Her skin was pale, her lips cracked, and her eyes, sunken but burning. She watched the press conference play out, her body tense with every word. Delilah's fake tears, the hand on her belly, the smugness masked behind sorrow. It all played on repeat in Sarah's mind. Her fists clenched, nails digging into her palms as she realized what they'd done. They had buried her before she'd hit the ground. She looked down at the smashed remains of her phone on the wooden table. It had cracked during the fall, the screen now useless. Her wallet and ID had been in her purse, gone with the wind. Or eaten by the forest. No signal reached the hut, and the ranger who owned it wouldn't return for another few weeks, judging by the calendar tacked on the wall. Her only company was silence, a bottle of water, and a barely working heater that clicked more than it warmed. She limped toward the window, each step agony. Outside, snow fell thick and slow. Her breath fogged the glass as she looked out at the trees. There was no one coming. She turned to the cracked mirror hanging beside the coat rack and barely recognized the woman staring back. Bruised, cut, swollen from frostbite. But her eyes were awake now, wide. A fire flickered behind them. They hadn't just tried to kill her, they'd replaced her. The following day, Grant sat in the boardroom at Collins Aviation, signing papers with a lawyer who smiled too much for the occasion. A death certificate stamped in bold. A transfer of ownership for Sarah's 28% share in the company. Her signature forged in ink that would never be questioned. The work of a notary already paid to disappear. It's done, the lawyer confirmed. Grant nodded, not even pretending to mourn anymore. Delilah stood behind him, glancing over the documents as she sipped champagne. That evening, Collins' mansion glowed with gold lights and masked dancers. a masquerade gala in honor of new beginnings, as the engraved invitations promised. The house that once belonged to Sarah, every hallway, every chandelier, every piece of art she had chosen, was now crawling with strangers celebrating her erasure. Delilah descended the grand staircase in a white sequined gown, her fake baby bump prominent under the fabric. The crowd applauded as Grant kissed her hand at the base of the steps, cameras capturing the perfect shot of their unity. A new air, a new era. In the crowd, board members mingled, discussing business as if the company's former matriarch had never existed. Delilah toasted with them, whispering promises of innovation and profit, while her hand rested protectively on the stomach that held nothing but ambition. "To the future," she said, raising her glass. Grant joined in, his smile wide, practiced. Not a trace of guilt remained. Back in the ranger's cabin, Sarah sat hunched over a torn notebook she had found in a drawer. Every page was filled with scribbled names, timelines, passwords she could still remember. She couldn't speak to anyone. She couldn't walk properly. But her mind was sharper than ever. She began tracing their moves, how the documents must have been forged, how Delilah faked the pregnancy, how Grant covered up the flight log. Her pen scratched hard against the paper as she wrote one name, in bold letters, Mila Johnson, her assistant. The last person who saw her at the hangar before the flight. The one who told her everything was all set and handed her a drink before boarding. She had smiled then, too brightly. Sarah's hand trembled as she circled. The name. Mila had always been loyal, or so she thought. A fire crackled behind her, melting the frost from the windows. Sarah didn't feel the cold anymore. Not really. She was burning inside now. Not with rage, not yet, but with something deeper. Betrayal had rooted itself in her bones. They had stolen her name, her company, her future, and were parading it like a prize. She looked down at her belly and placed her hand there. The baby shifted gently beneath her palm. Still alive. Still hers. The world had forgotten her. But she wasn't finished. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional, suspense-filled stories like this one. The metal door of the hangar groaned open as Sarah stumbled through, her body nearly giving out on the frozen concrete. Her breaths came out in sharp bursts, her hand pressed to her side where the bruises throbbed under every movement. The hangar was dark, lit only by a single strip of flickering light overhead. Broken aircraft parts, rusted toolboxes, and oil-stained tarps filled the shadows like silent watchers. She took another step, then collapsed beside a dented fuselage, her cheek hitting cold steel as the world dimmed around her. A voice cursed in the distance. Footsteps. Then a flashlight beam landed on her broken body. Boots shuffled closer. A figure knelt beside her. "You're not supposed to be here," the man said, rough and sharp, but his voice slowed as he took a closer look. "Jesus. You're her." His hand hovered over her shoulder for a second before pressing gently. "Sarah Collins. Thought you were dead." She couldn't reply. Just a faint groan left her throat before her eyes rolled shut. When she woke again, it was on a cot, wrapped in a military-grade blanket. The musty scent of engine, oil and leather filled her lungs. Her leg had been splinted, her face cleaned. The man sat across the room, his limp evident as he moved between two workbenches cluttered with wires and half-rebuilt radio panels. He didn't speak at first. Just glanced up once to make sure she was awake, then returned to stripping the casing off an old flight transmitter. "You're lucky I was here," he muttered finally. "No one uses this place anymore. Not since Grant shut it down." She tried to sit up, wincing at the pain that bloomed in her ribs. "Who are you?" "Troy Ramirez," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Used to fly combat rescue, then worked for Collins Aviation until I got canned for reporting some engine faults they tried to hide." He glanced at her again. Didn't expect the wife to be the one crashing in through my back door. Or what's left of her, anyway. Sarah coughed, her voice barely audible. They tried to kill me. I figured, he replied. But you don't walk away from a mid-air dump like that unless someone packed you a parachute. He motioned to the ripped bag on the floor nearby. That chute had a backup drive wedged in the inner lining. You stashed that there? She blinked. What kind of drive? Looked like it belonged to a flight log recorder, but encrypted. I cracked it open. He pulled a small metal casing from under a pile of blueprints and placed it on the table. You're gonna want to see what's on it. She swung her legs off the cot slowly, every muscle protesting. Troy handed her a battered laptop and plugged in the device. The files were labeled with sterile corporate tags, document scans, PDFs, folders named with dates and codes. But it didn't take long for Sarah to recognize the language of betrayal. One document showed a falsified life insurance policy, claiming Sarah had been confirmed dead and the payout already sent to a beneficiary listed as D. Marks. Another folder held grainy scans of Delilah's lab test results. One from a real clinic showing she wasn't pregnant, another doctored to show the opposite, stamped with a fake seal. Sarah's jaw tightened as she opened a series of internal memos between Grant and a compliance officer, discussing how her shares would be more useful in his sole control. They didn't just kill me, she whispered. They profited off it. Troy didn't reply right away. He just lit a cigarette with a metal Zippo and blew the smoke toward the open window. Grant's a snake, but he's good at covering tracks. These docs, someone wanted to keep them. Hidden bad. That's why they were in the chute. You must have suspected something. I had doubts, she muttered, scrolling faster. But I didn't think they'd go this far. Delilah. She's even wearing a fake bump. Troy snorted. She always was theatrical. Sarah turned to him. You knew her? He nodded, jaw tightening. We dated before she slithered her way into Grant's circle. She used to hang around the airstrip, looking for pilots to charm. Never thought she'd make it all the way to the mansion. Sarah's gaze dropped back to the screen. She made it by stepping over bodies. Mine was just the last one. Silence stretched between them. The heater buzzed in the corner. Snow tapped against the high windows above the hangar. You said? You worked for Grant, she said, eyes fixed on a file marked Asset Reallocation. Why'd he fire you? Troy leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Because I found hairline cracks in a few engine cores on the new S9 jets. Told him they needed to ground the fleet. He said I was being paranoid. Filed the report anyway. Next morning, I was gone. They covered it up, rebranded the jets, slapped a fresh coat of PR on it. He shrugged. Almost cost a senator his life when one of them stalled mid-air. But that got spun too. Sarah looked at him, something sharp setting in behind her eyes. You were silenced, just like me. Difference is, he said, nodding toward her belly. You've got more at stake. Her hand rested gently over the bump. They think I'm dead. They'll never expect me to come back. That's your advantage, Troy said. But you're still bleeding, and you're not going to win this by crawling back in through the front door. Then we start at the back, she replied, closing the laptop. Quiet. Focused. I know their world. I know their people. And I know exactly where their cracks are. Troy watched her a moment longer, then nodded once. Then let's plan how to break it all open. The bunker was buried beneath what used to be a radar outpost, forgotten by the FAA and untouched since. Troy welded the steel door shut years ago. Inside, it smelled of copper and dust. A maze of blinking monitors, rusted aviation parts, and floor-to-ceiling shelves stacked with logbooks and boxes of paper files. A single floodlight flickered overhead, casting long shadows that swayed across the concrete walls. Sarah sat at the central table, her fingers brushing across faded photographs and printed emails that looked like they had been ripped out of time. Troy leaned over a dusty metal drawer and pulled out a thick black binder, its cover creased and corners eaten away. You asked how far back this goes, he said, flipping it open to a grainy photo of Delilah in a red dress, younger, laughing into the ear of an older man. That was 5 years ago. Grant's father, Raymond Collins, the original face of the company. Sarah blinked, leaning closer. Her hand trembled as she lifted the photo. She was involved with him? More than involved? Troy said, sliding another document across the table, a copy of a private investigator's report dated just 6 months before Raymond's fatal heart attack. According to the PI, Delilah was living in one of his properties under a fake name. There were wire transfers, jewelry purchases, and threats. Sarah skimmed the report, her stomach turning. There it was in black and white. Not only had Delilah manipulated Raymond, but she'd blackmailed him with information about offshore accounts and bribery that could have destroyed the entire family. Troy tapped another image, a scanned email from Raymond to his legal team. She has leverage. I want her out before the will is signed. But he died before anything changed, Sarah murmured, more to herself than to Troy. Convenient. Timing, Troy replied. Heart attack at a private lodge. No witnesses, no autopsy. Sarah stared at the photo of Delilah again. The pieces clicked into place like ice snapping across a windshield. She hadn't just seduced Grant. She had planned her entry into the family like a chessboard, piece by piece. When Raymond died, Grant inherited everything, and Delilah already had her claws in him. What about the inheritance? Sarah asked, voice tight. Faked, Troy said bluntly. After Raymond died, Delilah presented a legacy trust with her name on it. But I got hold of the original filing. Her name wasn't there. Not once. She forged her way into that, too. Sarah pushed back from the table, breath caught between a gasp and a sob. So all of this, everything from the beginning, it was never just about Grant. She was playing both generations. Troy's eyes didn't leave her. And now she wants the third. Sarah's hand dropped instinctively to her stomach. The fire inside her had turned to steel. She stood slowly, walking past the old map wall to catch her breath. Her body still ached from her fall, but her mind was burning with clarity. There was a knock at the steel door, sharp and urgent. Troy froze. No one knows we're here. Sarah's heart kicked. She reached for the crowbar Troy kept near, the table motioning for him to stay back. Another knock, then a voice. Soft, familiar. Sarah? It's me. Mila. Sarah's grip loosened for a moment. She turned toward the door in disbelief. Mila? Troy looked uneasy. You sure? Sarah hesitated, then slid the viewing panel open. Mila stood in the snow, her hood pulled back, face flushed from cold. I had to find you, she said quickly. I saw things. What they're doing. Delilah's lying, Sarah. You were right. The daughter creaked open slowly. Mila stepped in, eyes wide as she took in the bunker. She hugged Sarah without waiting. You're alive. I can't believe it. Sarah didn't hug back. How did you find me? Mila looked around, her voice low. There was a digital trail. I hacked one of the internal Collins servers. I saw a flight log. The emergency chute recorded a GPS tag. I figured someone had to be alive. I followed it here. Troy watched her closely. What server? She flinched. I don't remember the name. I copied the files. I just wanted to help. Sarah pulled away, narrowing her eyes. Why? Now? Mila's hands twitched as she reached into her coat, pretending to fumble for a USB stick. Because you're my friend. Sarah stepped back. You gave me that drink, before the flight. You said it would calm my nerves. Mila's face paled. That was just tea. The lights flickered. Troy bolted to the monitors. Heat signature. Someone else is outside. A flash outside the window. Then a rumble. Get down. Troy shouted as an explosion rocked the far side of the hangar above them. Flames burst upward, licking across the ceiling. smoke pouring through the vents. Mila turned to run, but Sarah blocked her path. "You led them here." "I had to." She screamed, her face twisted. "Delilah promised me a seat on the board. I waited tables for 6 years. You think I was going to die in the background while you became the queen of everything?" Sarah didn't answer. She just stared, a look that stopped Mila cold. Troy grabbed a fire extinguisher and tossed Sarah a gas mask. "Back exit," he yelled. "Go!" They sprinted through the emergency hatch, down the side tunnel and out into the forest, the cold air hitting them like a slap. Behind them, fire poured through the busted rooftop vents, lighting the night orange. Mila's silhouette vanished into the shadows. Sirens in the distance, or maybe wolves. Sarah didn't care. They didn't stop running until the bunker was a glowing blotch behind them. They collapsed near the riverbed, gasping. Troy checked her over for burns. She waved him off. Her eyes locked on the flames through the trees. "They want me gone," she said, her voice hoarse and shaking. "Then let's show them what survival looks like." The ballroom shimmered in gold and glass, chandeliers dripping crystal above rows of champagne flutes and designer gowns. The Collins Aviation Charity Gala was always extravagant, but this year it dripped with excess. Cameras flashed, reporters hovered at the edges, and every elite name from the aviation and tech worlds circled through the room. At the center of it all stood Delilah, radiant in a silk emerald gown that curved over her fabricated baby bump, her arm looped through Grant's like a trophy. Just beyond the velvet rope, a woman with auburn hair and a deep red dress stepped from a black car. Her heels clicked steadily as she passed the entrance. She carried herself like money, quiet, unapologetic, commanding. Her makeup was precise. Her name on the guest list was Ms. Elena Ryder, a global investor from Zurich with ties to sustainable aviation technology. No one blinked twice. No one saw Sarah Collins. She entered the gala without a hitch, her ID badge clipped to a custom leather pass around her neck. Troy had prepared the paperwork meticulously. Elena Ryder had a portfolio, a website, a business card, and a bank account connected to an offshore trust that had been quietly buying up Collins Aviation's minor shares for the last 3 weeks. She moved with purpose, speaking briefly, to board members, shaking hands with hedge fund managers, smiling with just enough charm to disarm. Her eyes, however, never left the head table. Delilah was laughing with Malcolm Shaw, the company's head financial advisor, a man who liked his whiskey a little too much and his secrets far too exposed. Sarah slipped beside him later that evening during a panel meet and greet. "Mr. Shaw," she purred in a carefully polished British accent. "I've been told you manage the Collins Trust personally. That must come with unique insight." Shaw chuckled, already tipsy, clearly intrigued. "Only for those who ask." "The right questions, Ms. Ryder." "I find numbers more honest than people," she replied, passing him a custom-embossed card. "Perhaps we should talk." 2 nights later, she did. In a private dining room at a midtown restaurant, she handed him a small flash drive containing fabricated internal spreadsheets, enough to look real, dangerous, and just blurry enough to suggest embezzlement by Delilah. Enough to shake confidence, not convict. He took it greedily, promising discretion. Sarah didn't need the files to be perfect. She just needed whispers to begin. Within a week, she had brokered the purchase of another 4.6% of the company using Troy's offshore aliases. A series of dummy corporations shielded her name. No one saw the shadow tightening around the empire. Then came the boutique opening. Delilah stood in front of the cameras again, this time in a sleek white blazer dress, her pregnancy, cleverly, styled beneath layers of silk. The new Collins-branded boutique for luxury aviation accessories was her pet project. Bags, sunglasses, pilot gear designed for the elite. Sarah arrived without announcement, blending in with the crowd just as the mayor arrived to cut the ribbon. No one recognized her, not the board members sipping cocktails, Not the PR handlers pacing by the velvet curtain, not even Delilah, who stood 10 feet away accepting compliments on her radiance. On her chest hung Sarah's diamond necklace, the one Raymond had given her for her first year as CEO's wife. Sarah had left it in the mansion's bedroom drawer the night before the flight. She said nothing, just watched. Grant didn't show up. Rumor said he was in Texas dealing with a lawsuit about faulty aircraft parts. Delilah handled the spotlight solo now, more emboldened than ever. She posed with executives, took staged photos near the nursery display, where luxury bassinets sold for 5 figures, and even let a reporter kneel to kiss her hand while cameras rolled. Sarah left quietly after an hour. At the valet stand, she approached the attendant, a teenager more interested in TikTok than parking. "Could you give this to the woman in white?" she asked, handing him a tightly wrapped newspaper. Inside was a blue pacifier, old, worn, clearly used, with a faint bite mark along the edge. One that had belonged to her niece, passed down for her own child. Delilah would know it. Sarah walked down the steps, disappearing before the envelope reached the penthouse floor. Inside the boutique, Delilah peeled it open with a painted nail, assuming it was another product sample. Her smile froze, her eyes locked on the object inside. She said nothing, but her hand dropped slowly to her stomach. She knew. Outside, across the street, Sarah sat in the back of a town car, window lowered just enough to see Delilah falter beneath the spotlight. It wasn't much, a flicker, a fraction of a second. But Sarah saw it. The fear, the doubt, the crack in the mask. Troy drove the car forward without a word. The city lights washed over them like quiet thunder. A storm was coming, and Sarah no longer needed to shout to be heard. The Collins Aviation annual board meeting had always been a polished affair. Glass walls, tailored suits, live streamed to shareholders across 3 continents. This year, the air was tighter. Tension clung to the edges of the mahogany boardroom table as executives adjusted their ties and glanced nervously at their tablets. Delilah sat at the head of the table, her diamond earrings catching the light, her faux baby bump carefully framed by her blazer. Grant stood beside her, flipping through talking points with a practiced hand. No one expected turbulence. Until the doors opened, 2 men in suits entered first, lawyers, sharp and silent. Behind them, a woman in a navy dress stepped in, her heels echoing sharply across the marble. Her auburn hair was pinned tight, her posture unwavering. The room fell still as Sarah Collins walked to the center of the floor. The gasps started slowly. One board member dropped his stylus. A junior executive backed into the wall. Grant went pale, his lips parting in a soundless breath. Delilah's smile collapsed. She stared like she'd seen a ghost, and in many ways, she had. Sarah didn't. Wait for questions. She stepped to the center, nodding once to Troy, who stood quietly behind the lawyers, holding a black case. She opened it herself and placed a stack of documents on the center table. "These are originals," she said, voice calm, slicing through the silence. "Notarized files, flight logs, court-sealed documents, all tracing the systematic theft of my shares, the forging of my death certificate, and the life insurance fraud committed in my name." Grant found his voice. "This is insane. You're not even alive?" Sarah cut in. "Clearly I am, though not for lack of trying." Delilah stood. "This is a hoax. She's a disgruntled a nurse from Pasadena. Women's clinic is on standby," Sarah continued, not turning toward her. She confirmed that no patient named Delilah Marks was ever registered. Not for prenatal care, not for anything. The screen behind them switched. Troy clicked play on the first file. A security feed from a private clinic, dated the day Delilah had claimed to receive her first ultrasound. The nurse on screen confirmed the appointment slot had gone unfilled. Sarah turned to the board. "She faked the pregnancy to secure her position while conspiring with Grant to remove me. And then She nodded again. The next clip began. A silent black and white video of the jet cabin from 6 weeks earlier. Delilah, wearing her pilot uniform, yanking the door open mid-flight. Grant seated behind her. Sarah's voice, real, panicked, screaming, "I'm carrying your child!" Someone in the boardroom shouted. Another stood up, knocking over a glass. The room erupted in stunned murmurs. "I recovered the footage myself from the parachute's internal flight recorder," Sarah said. This was not an accident. This was attempted murder. And fraud. One of the lawyers stepped forward. In addition, a forensic analyst confirmed that the signatures used to transfer Mrs. Collins's company shares were forged. The notary, "In question, has fled the country. An international warrant is in motion." Grant opened his mouth but couldn't form a full sentence. Delilah reached for his arm. He pulled away. "You told me the footage was gone," he whispered. "You were supposed to handle it," she hissed. "Handle it? You opened the damn door. You signed off on the plan," she screamed, her voice cracking. The room fell silent. Again. Board members turned to each other, horrified. Phones lit up. Texts were already flying out. A few of the junior investors were live tweeting. Sarah didn't stop them. Police officers entered through the far door, silent and unannounced. 2 detectives moved to the front. "Mr. Grant Collins, Ms. Delilah Marks, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted manslaughter, and multiple counts of corporate embezzlement." Delilah lunged for the nearest file, screaming, "You can't do this." "I'm pregnant," Sarah's voice cut through cold. "Take her to a real clinic. You'll find the bumps just foam." Delilah snapped, slapping Grant across the face. "You said we'd win!" Grant stumbled back, dazed. "You dragged me into this. You begged me to save your company. By killing my wife?" The media had arrived by then. Cameras rolled, from every angle. The live stream had gone global. Screens in lobby lounges and shareholder suites across the country lit up with the footage. Executives backed away as the officers handcuffed the couple. Flashbulbs exploded. Reporters shouted. Sarah stood still, unmoved by the chaos around her. Troy handed her one final document, which she laid on the table, the reinstatement order for her shares, co-signed by a federal judge. Her name, her title, her company. "Thank you." Crowd parted as she walked out. Behind her, Grant shouted, "This was your company, too. You won't survive the fallout." Sarah didn't turn back. Her voice, cool and final, echoed in the room. "I already survived the fall." The hangar doors rolled open to sunlight pouring across a sleek runway lined with painted messages of encouragement. Girls in aviation jumpsuits, some, no older than 12, moved between training pods and restored flight simulators, their laughter mingling with the low hum of turbine engines. The Sky Reclaimed Foundation banner hung above the entrance, flapping gently in the breeze. Inside the glass-paneled atrium, staff guided students through aerodynamics displays, classroom tours, and coding stations labeled in memory of trailblazing women pilots. But all eyes shifted when Sarah stepped onto the tarmac. She wore a black blazer and dark jeans, her newborn daughter tucked close against her chest in a cotton carrier. The baby slept soundly, her tiny hands curled beneath her chin. The board members flanked Sarah but kept their distance. This day was hers alone. Camera crews followed her quietly, instinctively lowering their microphones as she passed. There were no press releases, no podiums, just her. The reporters had begged for a statement. One local anchor finally caught up, politely asking, "Ms. Collins, what does this day mean to you?" Sarah didn't speak. She turned instead and looked out at the runway, where a single aircraft descended from the clouds. A sleek, silver twin-engine jet, the same model she had once been pushed from. It touched down smoothly, its wheels whispering against the asphalt. Her eyes didn't flinch. She had bought the entire fleet with the restitution money. Every model was now registered under the Foundation's name. used exclusively to train underprivileged girls from around the country. No first-class seats, no champagne bars, just steel, speed, and second chances. As the plane taxied to a stop, applause rippled from the crowd watching from the observation deck. A group of young girls in flight suits stood at the edge of the hangar, saluting playfully. Sarah smiled faintly and kept walking, the weight of her daughter grounding her, steadying her. Inside the administrative building, a portrait hung above the front desk. Not of Sarah, but of her mother, Commander Elise Monroe, the first female lead flight instructor at Collins Aviation decades ago. She had died in a crash no one ever investigated properly. Sarah had found the old reports buried in the same vault. Grant once used to forge Sarah's death certificate. Elise had raised her to fight in silence, to fly above noise. Now, her name led the Foundation's mission. The crowd gathered slowly as Sarah approached the building's entrance. A black cloth was draped over a brass plaque mounted into the wall. Troy stood nearby, holding a folded paper in his hand. He didn't read from it. He didn't need to. Sarah reached out and pulled the cloth down herself. The metal gleamed under the sun. They threw her from the sky, but she built wings from the fall. The silence that followed felt like reverence. Not the kind they give heroes in war movies, but the quiet acknowledgement of a woman who had walked through fire and landed stronger. No vengeance, no speeches, just legacy. The reporters stepped back, unsure whether to film her or leave her alone. Sarah walked to the far edge of the landing strip, where wildflowers had been planted between the concrete cracks. The baby shifted gently in her sleep, one small hand reaching toward the sky. Behind them, the hangar filled with laughter again. Flight instructors led girls toward the simulation room. No guards, no glass ceilings. The jet behind her powered, down, its engines silent now. Where once she had been thrown from the sky, today she stood watching others rise into it. They thought gravity would erase her, but she rose with truth the wind couldn't carry away. If this story moved, you hit subscribe and stay with us for more.